Nick Majerison here. Welcome to Top Med Talk. So, this is a conference highlight. It's taken from our coverage of Anaesthesia 2018, the international meeting of the Royal College of Anaesthetists. And it's from day 2 of our coverage of that annual conference. Joff, Lacey and Desiree Chappell talk with their guest, Professor Iain Moppett, the Professor of Anaesthesia and Perioperative Medicine at the University of Nottingham.
Top Med Talk. Some of the concerns that cynics would say of big data, or the concerns, cynics, people who aren't quite ready for it yet, is obviously, and it's very topical, is privacy. And obviously in order to make big data successful, I imagine we need to make it very accessible. Do you share those concerns about privacy, particularly with healthcare related records, or is that something you think that we can resolve reasonably straightforward? What's your opinion on that?
I think the privacy concerns are completely legitimate, and I think nobody should ever dismiss those as unfounded concerns, because particularly with the scale of data, all it takes is one data breach or someone just being careless, that's the most likely thing, to have a huge impact on individuals. And we might think it's a trivial thing, but actually to those individuals it's really, really important. So I think it's absolutely fundamental that we get that trust right. Equally, I think we have a responsibility to society, which is to say, how do we actually improve care for the good of society, and and we need to have that conversation. We know from stuff that happened in the UK sort of 5-6 years ago that when we don't have that open and honest conversation about things, then it goes wrong. And people lose, trust is very, very quickly lost. But that needs to be a proper open discussion, not something which is done behind closed doors, not something done in government departments, not something that is done by people shouting across sort of barricades at. So I don't think there's an easy answer, if I'm honest. Truly anonymising data is very, very hard. And there may be essentially a myth about anonymising data. Yeah. It's on a spectrum, and so privacy is really important. It's not an insoluble problem, but we need to talk about it openly.
Well, last question here. So one of the things I always like to talk about is how we implement and how we use these things that we're talking about on larger scales into practice. And coming from anesthesia and some of the work you've done with patient safety and hip fractures and things like that, how are you utilizing big data and these numbers and information that we gather from that in your practice?
I think there's a few bits. One is actually I think we're not using it. Okay. That's the problem. As in we're not getting the data in, and that's.
Do we have it?
Yeah, I think we do have more data than we think. Mm-hmm. Although I've sort of mocked our specialty that we can't decide what general anaesthetic is. Well, actually, I don't care. Yeah. Because actually we should be getting more granular about what we're doing, not just trying to arbitrarily say, well, that was a general anaesthetic with a plus or minus a regional block. Let's actually say, well, that was a TEVA anaesthetic. And actually, those data we should be able to get those data in. But that involves people actually culturally saying, part of my good care is somehow getting those data in on a regular basis. It's not about doing snapshot audits of 50 patients. And it's about saying, year in, year out, we've captured 60-70% of the patients having this procedure. This is what we know happens. So, for instance, we did that. I'm going to inevitably talk about what I know about with the sprint audit around hip fractures. A lot of data in, a lot of anaesthetists putting a lot of effort in. We couldn't continually do that, though we should be able to. But what we did show is that the association of essentially of low blood pressures during surgery and bad outcomes. And those data are now starting to drive improvements. People are saying, actually, we're not quite sure whether it's cause or effect or association, but we think the hypotension is more common than we want it to be. Could we do better? So we are starting to see those data. But there is something like getting perioperative physicians, anaesthetists, more used to using risk stratification tools. They're better, I think, than we are. Yeah. But we don't like to admit in front of a patient that actually I'm going to plug some numbers in, this is going to give me an estimate, which I'll then individualise based on the person I'm seeing in front of me. So culturally we need to change. We're saying let's put data in, but with a compact with the people we give the data to, that it's going to come back in a meaningful way quickly enough, not 5 years later, which is our current trend.
Yeah. Well, Iain, thank you so much for sitting down with us today, and thank you for the great presentation earlier. It was wonderful.
Top Med Talk.
That piece is taken from a longer conversation, which you can find if you put the title RCoA 7 Big Data, AI and the Changing Face of Medicine into our search engine on topmedtalk.com.